Okay, let's see how to add a new object using Entity Framework. So in this code, I have created a course object, set its properties like name, description, full price. Note that I didn't set the ID because ID is an identity column and is generated by the database. And here I set the author of this course to a new author with ID 1 and name is Mosh Hamedani. Next, we add this course to the courses DB set in our context. So at this point, the change tracker in the DB context sees this object as a new object. And finally, when we call context.savechanges, Entity Framework will create a SQL command to add this course to the database. Now there is a slight problem with this code. Let me run the application and then I will show you what's wrong here. Okay, the record was added to the database. Let's go to SQL Server and open up the courses table. So look, we've got this new course here with new description and its author is 6. Let's take a look at the authors table. Note that here we have two Mosh Hamedanis, one with ID 1, one with ID 6. Why did this happen? Let's take a look at the code again. So note that in the code here, I'm referencing the author with ID 1. Then why did this code create another author with ID 6? The reason for that is because here we're instantiating a new author. So the change tracker sees this as a new object. It has no knowledge that we have an existing author in the database with ID 1 and name Mosh Hamedani. So how can we resolve this? There are two ways. One way is to bring this author object into our DB context, so Entity Framework knows that it exists in the database. Another way is to use the author ID foreign key property. The first approach often works in WPF applications, whereas the second approach, the foreign key way, fits better in web applications. So let's explore them one by one, but please be sure to watch this lecture to the end, even if you're interested only in WPF part or MVC part. Because what I'm going to teach you applies in both technologies and gives you a better understanding of the framework. Okay, now let's explore the first approach, using an existing author object. So in WPF applications, our DB contexts are long-lived. So they stay there in the memory as long as the window is open. We dispose them when the user closes a window. So we might already have this author object in the context. It could be there because we bound the list of authors to a list box or data grid on a form. In that case, we can simply get it from the context and set it here. So let me simulate this scenario. So imagine we load the authors here for data binding to a list or a grid. Now at this point, these author objects are in the DB context. So we can simply get the author with the ID 1 from the context. And here, instead of creating a new author, I will use this author object here. Now let me change the name of this course to differentiate. So I'm going to call this new course 2. And run the application. Okay, now let's go to SQL Server. And in the courses table, look, we got a new course and its author is 1. So we didn't get a new author in the database. Let's double check that here. So in the authors table, we don't have another Mosh Hamedani. Now there is a caveat here. If this author object is not in the context, Entity Framework is going to run a query on your database to get it. And this will have a slight impact on the performance of your application. So use this approach if you're 100% sure that you already have this author object in memory. Okay, now let's take a look at the second approach, using foreign key properties. With this approach, we don't need these author or authors objects here. So I'm going to delete them. Now, when creating a new course, instead of using the author navigation property, which causes an association between a course and author in the context, you can use author ID. As simple as that. This approach works well in web applications because in web applications, our contexts are short-lived. So we don't have objects hanging in the memory. We get a request, and as part of responding to the request, we create a context and then we dispose it. Having said that, you can definitely use this approach in WPF. Now, there's also a third way to solve this problem, which is not very common. At least I personally haven't used it often. But I'm going to share it with you in case there are some odd circumstances that this approach is going to help you. Imagine we have an author object, but it's not in our context. Something like this. In that case, I can bring this author object into our context here and then associate it with the course. So, in the context.authors.attach author. And here, instead of the foreign key, we use the navigation property. Now, personally, I don't recommend using this approach, even though Entity Framework gives you the ability to attach objects to a DB context. Over my years of experience with the Entity Framework and building various kinds of applications, I never felt the need to do so. Everything I wanted to do, I did it in a simpler way using the two approaches that I showed you. So just because Entity Framework has a method like attach doesn't mean you should use it. The problem with the attach method or similar methods is that they make you too close to Entity Framework's inner working. And later in the future, if they change their API or how things are done, then you have to change a lot of your code. So my recommendation is to use the two approaches that I showed you. If you have an existing author in the context, simply get that. Otherwise, use the foreign key property to create associations. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at how to update objects with Entity Framework. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and thank you for watching.